On a moonless night, October 29, 1914, two Ottoman warships slipped silently through the Black Sea. Their destination? The unsuspecting Russian port of Odessa. Without warning, torpedoes screamed from their launchers, lighting up the night sky. In just 30 minutes, the once calm harbor erupted into chaos. Ships burned, alarms blared, and the world changed. Back in Constantinople, not everyone celebrated, but the message was clear. The Ottoman Empire had entered the Great War, on the side of the Central Powers. Just 2 weeks later, the Sultan, as Caliph of Islam, issued a shocking decree: a global jihad, a holy war against the Allied powers. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. For months, the Ottomans had been quietly aligning with Germany, sealing secret deals, closing their straits to British ships, and preparing to strike. The Middle East was about to explode, and history would never be the same. Long before a single shot was fired at Odessa, the Ottoman Empire had already made its choice. In August 1914, just weeks after war broke out in Europe, the Ottomans signed a secret alliance with the German Empire. Their navy sheltered two German warships, Guben and Breslau, and even closed the strategic Turkish Straits, cutting off British access to Russia. But it wasn't just politics, it was desperation. The once mighty empire, now dubbed the sick man of Europe, was crumbling. German support promised modern weapons, money, and maybe survival. As war consumed Europe, the Ottomans turned their gaze eastward, toward the snow-covered mountains of the Caucasus. Here, they would challenge their old rival, Russia, hoping to reclaim lost territory and distract the Allies from Poland. It was bold, it was risky, and it would soon become one of the most disastrous campaigns in Ottoman history. Winter in the Caucasus is merciless, but Enver Pasha, the ambitious Ottoman minister of war, believed glory awaited in the snow. In late 1914, he launched a massive assault on Russian positions in eastern Anatolia near the town of Sarikamish, 6,000 feet above sea level. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a catastrophe. Unprepared for the brutal cold, lacking supplies, and led by flawed strategy, tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers froze, starved, or simply vanished into the white. Russian forces, though outnumbered, encircled the Ottoman Third Army and crushed them. Only a shattered few returned to Erzurum. But the defeat didn't just cost lives, it planted the seeds of something darker. Enver blamed the loss not on his own recklessness, but on the empire's Armenian population. Whispers of betrayal would soon turn into a state-orchestrated genocide. The war in the Caucasus wasn't just brutal, it was a turning point. And it had only just begun. While Ottoman forces froze in the mountains of the Caucasus, another front was heating up: Mesopotamia. In late 1914, British Indian troops captured Basra, a vital port at the head of the Persian Gulf. It was meant to protect oil interests, but success bred ambition. The British began pushing further north, eyeing Baghdad. Meanwhile, the Ottomans tried to strike back, this time in Egypt. Led by Jamal Pasha and a German advisor, they launched a bold raid across the Sinai Desert, aiming to seize the Suez Canal, Britain's lifeline to India. It was daring, it was dramatic, and it failed. The terrain was unforgiving, supplies ran thin, and British defenses held strong. Though repelled, the Ottomans didn't give up easily. They continued to threaten Suez for years. At the same time, the war spilled into neutral Iran, where British, Russian, Ottoman, and German agents clashed in a shadowy conflict that left over 2 million civilians dead. This was no longer just a war of empires. It was a war consuming everything in its path. April 25, 1915, as the sun rose over the Turkish coast, thousands of Allied troops stormed the beaches of the Gallipoli Peninsula. The goal? Break through the Dardanelles, knock the Ottomans out of the war, and open a supply line to Russia. But the Ottomans were ready. Under the sharp command of Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk, Turkish troops held the high ground, trenches filled with mud and blood. The terrain was hell. Disease, heat, and constant artillery turned Gallipoli into a nightmare. Of the first 200 Allied soldiers to land at Anzac Cove, only 21 survived the initial wave. Despite multiple offensives, including the massive August landings, the Allies couldn't break the lines. The front froze into stalemate. By January 1916, they retreated in silence. 250,000 men were killed or wounded on each side. Gallipoli wasn't just a failed campaign, It was a graveyard for imperial ambition and the birth of Turkish national pride. As Allied shells rained on Gallipoli, a quieter, more sinister war was unfolding deep within the Ottoman Empire. On April 24, 1915, just one day before the Allied landings, hundreds of Armenian leaders were rounded up in Constantinople. It was only the beginning. Under orders from Talat Pasha, the Ottoman regime launched a systematic campaign of extermination. For years, tensions had simmered between the Ottoman state and its Armenian minority, fueled by religious differences, nationalism, and paranoia. But now, fear turned into vengeance. Armenian men were disarmed and sent to labor camps. Many were executed. Women, children, and the elderly were forced on death marches through the desert, with no food, no water, and no return. In Van, Armenians fought back desperately until the Russians intervened. By 1917, between 500,000 to 1 million Armenians were dead. Countless others were forcibly converted or exiled. It was the first genocide of the 20th century, and the world looked away. In the dusty heart of Mesopotamia, British ambitions pushed ever northward. After taking Basra, General Charles Townshend led his weary army toward Kut, aiming to open the road to Baghdad. But in November 1915, disaster struck. Outnumbered and undersupplied, British forces were stopped at the Battle of Ctesiphon. Bloodied and exhausted, they retreated to Kut, only to be surrounded by Ottoman troops. What followed was one of the most humiliating sieges in British military history. For 5 months, 13,000 British and Indian soldiers endured starvation, disease, and relentless bombardment. 3 desperate relief attempts failed. The promised reinforcements never broke through. In April 1916, Townshend surrendered. The fall of Kut sent shockwaves through London. Over 23,000 casualties. Thousands taken prisoner. A proud empire brought to its knees by a collapsing one. Kut wasn't just a defeat. It was a brutal wake-up call. The Ottomans were far from finished. In the scorching deserts of Arabia, a new front opened. Not with armies, but with promises. The British, desperate to weaken the Ottoman Empire, turned to Sharif Hussein of Mecca, a powerful Arab leader. Through secret letters and diplomatic charm, they promised him independence in exchange for rebellion. On June 10, 1916, Hussein fired the first shot of the Arab Revolt. His forces swiftly captured Mecca, then Jeddah. But it was a British officer, T.E. Lawrence, who gave the revolt its legendary flair. Dressed like a Bedouin and fluent in Arabic, Lawrence led daring raids on the Hejaz Railway, crippling Ottoman supply lines. Together, the Arab forces and British commandos outmaneuvered better-equipped Ottoman troops. Though the revolt inspired hope, its military impact was limited. Most Arabs outside the Hejaz remained uninvolved. Still, it lit a fire, one that would shape the Middle East for generations. And it made a man named Lawrence a myth that would outlive the war itself. As 1917 dawned, the British Empire prepared for redemption. After the humiliating loss at Kut, they restructured their Mesopotamian front under General Stanley Maude, and this time they moved with precision. By March 1917, Maude's army entered Baghdad, not as conquerors, but as liberators. The fall of the ancient city was a blow to Ottoman prestige, and a victory the British desperately needed. Meanwhile, in Palestine, General Edmund Allenby launched a renewed offensive after 2 failed attempts to break Ottoman lines at Gaza. The Third Battle of Gaza changed everything. Backed by overwhelming artillery, Mark V tanks, and chemical shells, British troops shattered the defenses. Ottoman forces crumbled, retreating north. By December, Allenby entered Jerusalem, on foot, out of respect for its sanctity. Across Britain, church bells rang. Propaganda called it the Last Crusade. But for the Ottoman Empire, it was the beginning of the end. By 1918, the Ottoman Empire was barely standing. Famine, disease, and ethnic violence tore through its remaining lands. But the final blow came not in Mesopotamia or Palestine, but from the Balkans. At the Battle of Megiddo, British forces shattered Ottoman lines with air power and mechanized troops. Thousands surrendered. Weeks later, British troops marched into Aleppo. Yet it was the collapse of Bulgaria and a breakthrough at the Salonika front that truly sealed the Ottomans' fate. Surrounded, isolated, and exhausted, the empire signed the Armistice of Mudros on October 30th, 1918. The Great War in the Middle East was over. But peace brought no relief. Over 7 million people had perished. Conflicting promises, British to Arabs, French to Christians, secret treaties with imperial ambitions, laid the groundwork for decades of unrest. The Ottoman Empire died, but the modern Middle East was born, in smoke, blood, and betrayal.